Welcome everybody to Guests and Gusto, SCAD's virtual series of conversations and digital content with the creators and innovators remaking culture. Today we have guests with lots of gusto, so I would fasten your seatbelt. I am Julie Johnson-Olson. I'm a fashion professor at SCAD, and I'm very happy to introduce Stefan Beckman and Julie Mannion. Today, these two industry leaders are going to share with us their creative process of bringing Marc Jacobs' creative vision to life during New York Fashion Week, from ideation to runway. Sensational. So you're going to see some amazing stuff. For more than 20 years, Stefan has created visionary environments for fashion shows, editorials, exhibitions, branded events, and commercial campaigns. He's highly sought after as a production designer as well as an art director, and he's collaborated with fashion and photography's biggest names: Karl Lagerfeld for Chanel, Prada, Alexander McQueen, Tom Ford, and so many more. His editorial work can be seen in the most cutting-edge and widely circulated magazines in the world, including American Vogue, Italian Vogue, Vanity Fair, Interior Design, and Interview Magazine, W Magazine, and T Magazine, in addition to designing exhibitions for the Museum of Modern Art PS1, the Brooklyn Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the Queen Sofia Institute. Wow. He has also designed luxe events for Hermes and Harry Winston, as well as the CFDA Awards in 2017 and 2018. Wow. Julie Mannion joined Keeble, Cavaco, and Duca, now known as KCD, as an assistant stylist to mentors and founders Kezia Keeble and Paul Cavaco. She was instrumental in developing KCD's public relations division, assumed leadership of the agency, and expanded to Paris in 1997 and London in 2012. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, KCD retained clients such as Calvin Klein, Ralph Lauren, Helmut Lang, Versace, Louis Vuitton, Marc Jacobs, Alexander McQueen, Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, and Givenchy. She's also produced pivotal industry events, including Seventh on Sale, as well as events for Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and other elite publications. With KCD, Julie has produced the annual CFDA Awards for nearly 20 years. That's amazing. Celebrated for evolving the agency into the global powerhouse that it is today, she continues to propel KCD forward in innovative ways. So you guys are going to have a fabulous hour here with Stefan Beckman and Julie Mannion. Thank you both for being here. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. I guess I'll start. I'm Stefan Beckman. I am a set designer. I'm based in New York City. I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada. I lived there for about 6 months and then grew up in California and Texas. I went to the University of Texas in Austin, and I majored in theater and in film. Moved to LA, worked in the film business, worked in the film industry, and then had always wanted to live in New York. So I moved to New York in my mid-20s, not knowing anybody, and kind of weirdly enough, found fashion through friends and through just people that I had met in New York when I first moved there. So I was lucky enough to meet people and just start my fashion career that way. I'd always been interested in set design and interiors and architecture. So what I wanted to do was work on sets and work on environments and kind of see what happened from there. I started working on shoots in like the mid 1990s, working in fashion, and then eventually getting a call to do a show for Marc Jacobs, which changed my career and changed my life. And I have some highlights I could show you. Just some of the things I've done along the way. I worked with Prada on several campaigns, and I've done some installation work for them in Milan for their stores. This is a campaign we did with Stephen Meisel. And this is a campaign I did for Balenciaga with Stephen Klein. I mean, they're all really different in their way, and that's, I think, the most interesting thing about what I get to do still to this day, is that not one job is the same. So, so I get to do so many different styles, so many different things, and be able to be creative in different ways. This is something for the New York Times, doing like an interiors kind of section for them. Did a few covers, you can see. There's an editorial I did for French Vogue with Inez and Vanud, with Christy Turlington. These are some other celebrity covers over the years. I've worked with a lot of celebrities, you know, along the way, for magazine covers, for album covers back in the day when there was that. And then also like campaigns where celebrities are attached. This is some of those. This is another editorial I did for Document magazine. This is a campaign for Marc Jacobs with Miley Cyrus, which tied back to the show that we had just done for Marc. This is an exhibition I did with Gucci in Shanghai, which kind of brought a bunch of artists together, and we created environments for that. This is another editorial for V Magazine with Rihanna. This is a campaign for Valentina with Stephen Meisel, based on dance, specifically kind of using Pina Bausch as a kind of starting point for the campaign. This is a show, in addition to working with Marc, I've worked with a lot of different houses and worked on a lot of different fashion shows. This is another show I did for Balenciaga when Alexander Wang was at Balenciaga in Paris. And this is another one of Marc's shows that we did at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York. This is something I did for Adidas. In addition, I've been doing kind of brand things for certain brands, and Adidas is an interesting brand that you can kind of think out of the box and do things very creatively. So this is something we did in New York a couple years back for Hype Fest. There's a Marc Jacobs campaign that we did with Stephen. And this is something that came out recently for Vanity Fair with Lupita, Vanity Fair cover, which is great. Some magazine and video stills that we did for Love magazine. And this is something for British Vogue, kind of a recycled clothes story, which was really fun to do. This is a show I did for Coach, which we built a giant dinosaur out of just abandoned things that we found along the way. And this is a show I actually did with Julie as well. For Louis Vuitton, we did at the former TWA terminal in New York last year.
Thanks, Steph. You did great work. It's really exciting to work with you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So my name is Julie Mannion, and I came to New York in 1981, and I had just graduated from Vanderbilt University, and I was looking for my first job. So I was a business and fine arts major, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but somehow I knew that I wanted to be in fashion, and didn't really at that point know what existed in fashion, because my only exposure to it from being from St. Louis was retail, and I sort of knew I did not want to be in retail, and I wanted to be on the creative side, but I didn't really know what that meant. So I figured whatever it meant I needed to be in New York. So thankfully I had a good friend who was moving to New York, and I moved in, as I said, 1981. And I was going to be interviewing with different magazines at Condé Nast and at Hearst and different things, because that's kind of what I knew would be a good analogy. I had zero, I always loved design. I couldn't draw to save my life. I had zero design from a designer point of view. I knew I couldn't do that, but I didn't really know what else was out there. So I thought, I'm going to either look into the magazine world or look into another creative world. And I really wanted to find out what that meant. So I was really, really lucky in that I had a family friend who said that my cousin was a stylist, and I didn't even know what a stylist was at that point, but introduced me to a stylist, and that happened to be Keisha Keeble and Paul Cavaco. And I met with them actually on the set. I moved to New York, and 8 days later, I was somehow connected with them. And I met with them on set, and the next day, Keisha called me and said, luckily, one of her assistants had just quit, and did I want to work for them? I was like, absolutely. So I started with them, and my first day of work, I was sent on a shoot for Richard Avedon and Candice Bergen, and shooting with Way Bandy and Howard Fugler, and doing the Candice C commercial. So I thought, oh my God, this is pretty good. I liked my first day. And I started with them and maintained with them. And I would say the first 3 years, I really worked the hardest I've ever worked in my entire life as a stylist assistant. And I loved every minute of it. We did every major campaign, every editorial, every advertising campaign. And, you know, Keisha and Paul were just amazing. They were revolutionary in their work. We worked with all the new photographers at the time, who were Bruce Weber, Stephen Meisel, Herb Ritz, Bill King, Patrick Demarcier. So I had the opportunity when I first started to work with every single major photographer. And as an assistant, I did every aspect of it. So it was just the most incredible learning experience I think I ever could have asked for. So I did everything from shopping for all the ads. I went on set for every shoot. You know, I packed everything up. I redid everything. So it was really an exciting time, and really I learned a lot about the fashion industry and all the different parts of it. And you know, I really got exposure and got to see. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. So that was really the first early years in the 80s. And I would say in 1984. Keeble Cavaco really evolved into Keeble Cavaco and Duca, as John Duca, who was the style editor of the New York Times, joined the agency. And he really brought to it, with his writing skills, a lot of, you know, advertising and public relations aspect. And my late partner, who just passed away recently, Ed Filipowski, joined in '84 as well. And we really sort of, at that point, branched into PR as well as the styling and fashion show event part of it. Later, as we sort of evolved, sadly, Keisha Keeble and John Duca died of AIDS and breast cancer in '89 and '90. And Ed and I took over the company, and we really evolved it into kind of the fashion public relations and special event agency that it is. We were very lucky. This is probably the early '90s. And so that's right when fashion was going global. And I think we just happened to be at the right time, at the right place. And, you know, a lot of our contemporaries were just kind of starting out then. And so it was really a very, very exciting time in fashion. So Ed and I really evolved the agency and kind of grew it into what it is today. As Julie had mentioned, we opened our Paris agency in 1999. And that was with Tom Ford, who was actually asked Ed to take over and do the public relations for Yves Saint Laurent, and would we be the global agency to do that? So we really thought, well, this is a great opportunity to open Paris, and we did that. Right around the same time, Marc Jacobs had joined and had started at Louis Vuitton, and Marc was a client of ours as well. So we started doing fashion shows and really PR both in Paris, kind of all through the late 90s and early 2000s. And then we opened our London office in 2012. And have continued to kind of grow it as it is today. So I'll take you through a little bit of some of the events and give you a little background. So this is Stephen Sprouse, and in 1984, we did his really infamous show at the Ritz in New York. And Stephen was one of the new designers and kind of new young designers at the time. And it was an incredible period in New York. You know, you always hear about New York in the 80s, and it was really an exciting time, and a lot of young designers, a lot of new energy, a lot of new youth. And Stephen did a really incredible show at the Ritz. And obviously he was known for his graffiti and his neon and his sort of energy and excitement. So that was really an amazing show to be part of, and just such a talented person. Another sort of aspect of what we did is I produced the Madonna Sex book. That was with Stephen Meisel and Fabian Baron, who was the art director, and Paul Cavaco, who was my partner at the time, was the stylist. And so they asked me to produce the book. So I did all of the location work, and scouting and worked with them on all the shoots and all the sets. So that was really an exciting and interesting period of time too. And going on, Calvin, I started working with Calvin in the late 80s and produced every fashion show that Calvin did for as long as he was there, still at Calvin. And I have to say, Calvin was such an amazing designer to work for. Has such energy, such detail work, and just he was one of my, I'd say, top 5 just inspiring designers to work for. This was a huge event that we did at the Hollywood Bowl, and it was really a challenge and really exciting because it was at the Hollywood Bowl, and it was because the scale of the Hollywood Bowl was so big, and they knew that they wanted to have an outside show, and this was in conjunction with APLA, which was a big AIDS organization, which had a lot of big shows in the late 80s and 90s, and they had asked Calvin to do this, and so it was going to be an outside show, a dinner, fashion show. Tina Turner performed there, and when we got there, Calvin was like, "Oh, this is huge. We need to have a lot of models. We need to have a lot of people." And he's like, "How many do you think we need to have?" And I was like, "Well, to do a show of this caliber, I think we need like 300 models." So that was one of the first shows that we did, which had, 300 models was unheard of at that time. You probably had maybe 40 or 50 models. So and we decided to do a real person casting, and Marky Mark was in there in the show, and Kate Moss was in the show. And it was really the world of Calvin. It was really celebrating the whole world of it. It was just really an amazing event. And then Anna Sui, I've worked with for over almost 30 years now. And Anna, we started with her. In fact, Keisha was asked to do a fashion show for Polaroid, which was coming out with a new Polaroid film. And they asked us to do a show and pick the 3 new young designers. At that point, we had picked Stephen Sprouse, Anna Sui, and Vivian Tam as the 3 designers. And so we've done every one of Anna's shows since then too. And I have to say, she's an amazing person to work with because she's such a fashion historian. And just to work with her and to see the research that she does, and the references and the passion that she has for fashion, and it's just really exciting. And then of course Anna was really good friends with all the supermodels of the time, so we got to do all the shows with Christy and Naomi and Linda, and she's really an amazing designer. And then Alexander McQueen, we did a show for McQueen, who was coming to New York he was opening his new store here. So he decided to do a show in New York in 1999. And we did it at the Pier 94 on the West Side Highway. And this was particularly interesting because, and I have to say this is the first show I'd actually done with Lee. And I had known him in the 80s, and I'd met him and we had done PR work for him, but this was actually the first fashion show produced with him. And he is utterly, utterly, utterly amazing to work with. I mean, his vision, comes out fully formed from day one. So as he's designing the collection, he has this full vision for the fashion show. And it was just so incredible to see somebody that was that detailed and that specific on what they wanted to do. And this one at the pier was going to be a fashion show. And what you're seeing is the very end of it, where these spikes come out of the water. So you actually had a fashion show, and you had all the models walking in what looked like water. And he wanted the water to have viscosity, so it was kind of an oily water. And we had there, and then we had a Cirque du Soleil element. So you had a lot of performers that were doing aerial stunts in the air directly over the models. And then at the end, this whole bed of nails comes up from the runway. And the interesting part of this, and I'll never forget this day, was that was also the day we had the hurricane hit in New York. So all shows were canceled. In fact, this show got canceled, and it was supposed to be an 8 o'clock at night show. At about 3 in the afternoon, they closed the West Side Highway, closed the pier. The mayor closed the whole West Side Highway. And because we had the show, somehow we matriculated and were able to get the mayor on the phone, and the thing they were able to open the highway. So obviously the hurricane had passed, and so we were able to get it open, and it was an amazing show, but one that will never be forgotten. This show for Marc Jacobs was equally interesting in that it was probably one of the first shows that Marc did that really had a theme to it. And this was in conjunction with the opening of MARC's first fragrance. So it was a fragrance launch for his new fragrance, and Sofia Coppola was his muse at the time. So the whole thing had a water theme to it as well. And so we ended up building a pool because the ad campaign had a big pool in it. So we built a pool on the backside of the pier. So the show was actually done in a clear tent, and it had a dividing wall, so you didn't really get to see the back part of the pier. And then at the end of the show, MARC comes out and the door opens and it leads all the guests to the backside into a party. Again, as can really happen in September in New York, we also had a hurricane. This was the night before September 11th. So this was on September 10th. And so it was I think in some of the photos you probably actually do see, I mean, not in this one, but you do see the Twin Towers. So this was probably the last night that you actually did get to see them. But this show, it was probably at the time, it was over $2 million event, which was a huge amount of money at that time. And it was because they had the perfume and they had all the different things. And as we designed the show, we sort of had to take the big risk, and we openly did it and said, the show will be under a tent, but there is no contingency for the backside. So as the day went on and the hurricanes came, you could see it just coming straight over the river in New Jersey. And it started to pour down rain about 3 in the afternoon. And I mean, it was raining sideways. And so again, we didn't know if the show was going to be able to happen. And the show finally was called for 8 o'clock. And at 8 o'clock, MARC and the entire collection was still down at MARC Studio. But we were able to get the collection there, and we were able to have the show. And then afterwards, the doors opened and the party happened. And it was probably one of the most magical nights that people ever remember. I mean, there was a lot of mud, but it was an incredible night. And then the next day, of course, we had 9/11. So a lot of memories there. Helmet was also one of our big clients, and we worked with Helmet both in New York and Paris. And obviously, Helmet was just a defining force in New York. And he moved to New York and just, really made such a mark on fashion. And he was an amazing person to work with also. And his fashion shows and his energy and his point of view and his combination of men and women in a show, and his Helmet would actually call the show himself, and he would be backstage and he would be sending every model, and he had this really interesting staccato pacing that he would do, and he made every model go around twice, and then he would thread the models in to create this tension and this sort of excitement. So it was really, really interesting, and it was a big loss when Helmet decided to retire, because he was just an amazing creative. Next, another type of event that we did, because we often did not only fashion shows, but we did big industry events. And H&M, which I think you all see now who do so many, but this was in 2005, which was one of their earlier events they did. And they came to us and they said that they really wanted to do this big event. They had an idea that they wanted to do it in Central Park. So we decided to do this big event, and we modeled it after sort of a happening that, and we decided to call it Live from Central Park. And they really gave us full creative control of the entire event. And we created this incredible round tent there. And we did this great, kind of a picnic type of thing in the park. And we got to choose the creatives. And so we said, we had these new creatives, which were just coming on the scene, which were Kanye West, who had never, and that year he ended up winning all the Grammys that year. And we also did, John Legend. So we chose John Legend and Kanye as the two creatives, and I have to say that was one of our smartest choices that we ever had, because they were amazing. So it was a great event. Ralph Lauren, I worked with for over 20 years as well, and this happened to be his 40th anniversary event that he did, and we did this at Central Park Conservancy up on 104th Street. And we're able to do an incredible show in a tent. And what you're seeing here is part of the after party, where we had a seated dinner for 200 that were in the background, where you see there with the chandeliers. And it was just really a magical, magical night for that. And Ralph was just thrilled with the event. And And then this one was something that we've done more recently, which was one of the first See Now, Buy Now. And I have to say it was really exciting to work with Tommy on, we did many of his events. This one was actually down on the pier, down by the Southside Seaport. And as you can see, we did a full carnival. And this was one of his first collaboration that he did with Gigi. And we really turned this into a full event, and it was over, actually ended up being over a 2 to 3 day period. And we did a full carnival, and we worked with Brooklyn Fair and had incredible food. And then we opened up the show the next day and over the weekend to over 3,000 people. So this was probably one of the first, you know, kind of live to consumer events. And it was really a big success for them. And he went on to do several others. So it was a big production. This is Louis Vuitton, one of the shows that we did. And as I said, I worked with MARC starting probably in 1996. I actually met him when he was still at Perry Ellis. And after he worked for Perry, he started his own company with Robert Duffy, who was his business partner for many, many years. And so we started helping him out on his New York shows probably in the mid 90s. And then by the time 1997 came, he actually was named the creative director at Louis Vuitton. So I've done every fashion show for MARC since 1996. And then I did all of the Louis Vuitton shows that MARC did there and worked with him. And again, this is an interesting thing because working on a fashion show, you can work in many capacities. On some shows, we do the full production, which is, you know, everything from finding the location to building the sets to hiring all the vendors to working with the designer. This show in Paris, we worked with MARC, and we actually worked with him on the collection side of it and did all the choreography. And then we kind of paired, since at that time, Paris, we didn't have an office in Paris where we were doing the full production aspect, and we partnered with another company in Paris who did this. But this was really an exciting show, and probably one of the most historic shows. The famous train show and the famous elevator show were probably two of our favorite ones that we did. This show was a show that we did the full production on in Rio de Janeiro for Nicholas, and it was in 2016. And having transitioned from working with MARC at Louis Vuitton to Nicholas at Louis Vuitton was really exciting. I wasn't anticipating that I would be able to do that, but it was really exciting to do that. And Nicholas is such a visionary as well, very different than MARC, but just an incredible futurist. And so he's very interested in architecture. So typically all the venues that we chose and that worked up with are really kind of iconic architectural spaces, and often involve the models going from inside to outside and using the space and using the area. And this was really an incredible show. And this show, as Steph said, we worked on together. This was for Louis Vuitton, and that was their last cruise show that they did in New York. And it was at the TWA terminal, which had not opened yet. And they had just converted the terminal, which is, again, another landmark architectural space in New York. And we got to use the space before it opened, and it was amazing. So we really took the entire space and used it in such an innovative way. And you'll see Steph had brought in all the greenery and all of the things. And I think that they must have been horrified, since it was a brand new space. And we probably were, and Nicholas's, you can tell his inspiration was to have it all decayed. So it was interesting. And then additionally, we had worked with John Galliano on his Margiela shows, his Maison Margiela shows. And we started with him and worked with him for over 5 years, doing all of his artisanal and ready-to-wear collection shows. And now he refers to them as his co-ed shows for his men's and women's combined together. And I have to say, I knew John. I met John in the early 80s when he was in London and just starting off, and worked with him kind of throughout the years, and did not work with him when he was at Dior or many of those years that he was there. But we started working with him again at at Maison Margiela, and I have to say he too is like one of the most creative and inspiring. And if you all haven't seen his video on the Margiela show, I would suggest you watch it, because it's really an incredible thing for a student to watch, because it really goes through his entire process of a show. Donatella is one of my favorite people in the world, and I've worked with Donatella and Johnny since 1989, and knew Johnny very well, and continued to work with Donatella. This is the show that one of the more recent shows that we did with J-Lo, and which was the surprise show that we did. And I remember actually the day that we happened to be doing a big event for Versace in New York, the day that J-Lo first wore the palm print into the Grammys, and it was, nobody could believe how much press that got. And I mean, obviously it's sort of an infamous. So to bring J-Lo back and to do the show with her in Milan was just a lot of fun, and a huge. I've worked with J-Lo on many different events, so she's really a lovely person, and it was really a great thrill to do. So CFDA awards, as I said, I worked on and produced many of the CFDA awards, or all the CFDA awards, I guess, from 2001 to through 2019, and it's a really interesting to produce an award show is a very different thing, because here you get to do, you're producing film, you're producing an event, you're producing a live event, you're producing oftentimes we'd have little vignettes or fashion shows. So it's from a production and a producing point of view, it's really stretching, and you're also doing the scripting, and you're doing the producing the film, and kind of coordinating the whole evening and coordinating the talent. So it was really a stretch to do from a production point of view, but it was really, quite interesting. And I'm quite passionate about New York fashion and supporting our industry, and really have a really strong passion for that. So that was a thrill. And then what we thought, Steph and I thought we would do today is really take you all through, because we have such great memories and experiences from working with MARC, and we thought, as a great tool, it would be fantastic to take you all through not only the different roles of fashion shows and what kind of the different roles that people do play in that, but also how we are able to do that. So I'm going to let Stefan tell you about the on this show. I served as producer, so we were in charge of all the production, all of the location, all of the vendors, having everything built, working with Mark and his team on getting the collection ready. And Stefan served as the set designer on that. So I'm going to let Stefan take you through this.
Yep. So we usually show in the Park Avenue Armory. So this is a space in New York. It's a historic space. For many years, we showed in Lexington Armory, and we've moved to the Park Avenue Armory several years ago. And the great thing about the Armory is that it's just a big, open, beautiful space. It's a beautiful venue. It was, built in the 1800s. So this is the space empty. So we've done many amazing things here. And it's one of the few spaces in New York that is like this columnless, vast,
high ceilings
that you can create incredible things. And they've done a lot of art installations there, a lot of performances, a lot of, ballets, operas, some concerts. So it's truly, I think, the best space in New York, also for arts. So it's really a pleasure to be able to create spaces there. So we've done many amazing things over the years with Mark. And with Mark, one of the most amazing things about him is that he doesn't want to do the same thing twice. So, when we start to think about shows, it's a very short timeline. He waits until the design is kind of germinated in his head and he knows where things are going. So we have a meeting about 2 weeks before the show, believe it or not, depending on the season, sometimes a little less. We sit down and we kind of just talk about what he is feeling, what he's feeling emotionally about the collection. And it's not that it's necessarily done, but it's just where he's feeling. And I think the best thing about that is that we're not creating something that has nothing to do with the collection. So we're creating something that's actually he's fine-tuning and working on as the collection itself is really coming into its own, and really the process is really special that way. So over the years, we've done some amazing installations and big builds and big things. So a few years back, Mark was interested in maybe just paring back things, but still having an emotional show, still having an important show and something that was creative, but how can we create a show in an environment in a different way? So it wasn't necessarily about a set, like a big set, but the environment became the set. And I mean, in some respects it's simpler, but sometimes the simpler things are a lot harder because you have less eye candy for the eye to kind of go to. So this is the first show we kind of pared things back. We call it the hip hop show. And the show was in the Armory. We had 2 rows of seats, as you can see there, just kind of regular folding chairs that had numbers on them. The audience went into an empty room. They sat down, not knowing what was going to happen. The models started coming out through the very end there. You could see they went at one by one, no music at all. Really silent, and a very strange experience to have the models in front of you, no music, and in a silent room where you just heard the footsteps of the models with their shoes. So it was like this interesting kind of echo. And then the show happened. I think we probably had 50, and Julie, you probably remember,
54, his magic number.
Magic number, 54 looks. So the audience went up, got up to leave, and exited the other side of the Armory. We had them exit
Park Avenue side.
Enter on Lexington, not knowing, if you keep going in the slides, not knowing that all the models were outside with a giant soundtrack of these huge speakers on Park Avenue playing hip hop. So it became like a theater piece. So the interesting thing about MARC is, like, even if something is relatively simple to the eye, there's many layers to make it a theatrical, interesting, experiential kind of show. So over the last few seasons, so that was our first to kind of try things differently in the Armory. So we did a few different versions. We did a version with seating on the side and a big empty space in the dark, as you can see this show, which was in silence again, but the finale was had an amazing aria opera playing. So it was this really emotional, you can keep going and see some of the other shows. So the models kind of walked throughout the space, and then all in mass kind of walked through the space. And then we toyed with the idea of an all black environment. We started adding some elements back in. This was black glass, so a black floating glass with lucite chairs. So it really felt like you were in this kind of void, like this empty void. This audience was just seated, as you can see, a very small audience. And what Mark's done interesting, we used to have shows where there were like 1,000 people at the shows or more. He likes the idea now to pare it back. So it doesn't become like a big party fiasco. It really is about the close, the experience for the viewer in the room. And it just, even if these shows seem simple, and Mark and I have talked about this, I think some of these shows, and this one especially, was extremely, extremely beautiful, dramatic, and maybe one of the best things we've ever done. And it was relatively simple, at least to the eye, but you know, there's all these other layers on top of it. And you know, sometimes it takes us a while to get to there. Sometimes we add things, we subtract things. Sometimes we go, over the years, we've started about things and we've developed a set and then change direction and go to a different set. So because the collection is really coming together as its own, so he wants to make sure that it makes sense, and that, you know, that it's part and parcel, like a director would direct a film, like, you know, that the sound is right, the music is right, the clothes obviously are right for the environment and for the feeling in the room. So the last show, I'll let Julie kind of start on this. Do you want to go ahead, Julie?
Yeah. So this last show that Mark did at the Armory, which was we call it the dance show. It's really and Carol Armitage was the choreographer. And Mark, we came to the show, and this was actually done particularly late in the process. And Mark was really struggling this season on what to do, and he didn't really know what he wanted to do. He sort of we've been talking about doing choreography over the past few years and using a choreographer, but you know, it never really felt right. But this show, he was very specific, and then he said that, you know, this show reminded him of New York in the 80s. And he was really kind of going back in his own mind of what he loved most about New York. And it was really about the energy. It was about the things. And he actually referenced the Stephen Sprouse show at the Ritz because he was there at the time. And that was such an iconic show to him as a young, you know, he was just out of school. And you know, it was just such an iconic show to him. And it was the idea of multiples and the energy and the excitement that you get. So he was really inspired by all that. And so as we were talking about it, we were kind of going through different choreographers and who he would have. And then, you know, we kind of had Michael Clark, a lot of different choreographers all around. And then Mark suddenly said, I know. And he said, he called me up and he said, I want Carol Armitage. And Carol, for him, represents, she was really known as the punk ballerina, probably back in the 80s. And she is an amazing choreographer. And she's probably one of the top ones, like a Martha Graham. And she's worked, she now has her own dance troupe, and she does really modern dance and very sort of strong and angular and very kind of aggressive movements. And Mark felt like this would be a good pairing to what he had in mind for the collection. So we started with Carol and continue. And I'll let Stefan.
When we're developing the show for something like this, so the set in a way became about the choreography. It became about movement, the energy of New York, the energy of the city. So we started with an empty armory like we had been doing, but then decided to do a cabaret, kind of this cabaret feeling. So the audience would come into this empty space, kind of like a cabaret, and they'd sit at these little tables with little candles and, you know, like they were about to watch a show. You know, and then we had these speakers kind of around the room engaged. And then we had, if you keep going, if you go one more, yeah. So what we did is we had the models enter from, you can see entrance
A, right? Mm-hmm.
So the models would walk through there, and the models would be one thing, and the dancers would be intertwined. So there was almost, in a way, Julie, wouldn't you say it was like two shows brought together and like married together? It was the dancers.
I mean, yeah, the great challenge about this show, and really the exciting part of it, is that simultaneously, as Carol was designing the actual ballet or the actual dance movement, Mark was designing the collection. So he was on one floor designing it, and Carol was on the floor below, and we ended up here having 70 models, and there were about just about the same. I think there were 70 dancers as well. So in order for the dancers, you know, obviously Carol was going to design that aspect of it. But what we had to figure out, because models would only have a 1 hour rehearsal. So, you know, we'd get the models for an hour. So we were like, how do we design this so that you can design your dance thing, and we can give the models sort of a fail-proof plan that they can follow, because they're not going to be able to, you know, it's going to be way too complex for them to do something difficult. So what we did here is what you see, this kind of loop diagram is really where the models would walk. And so we had half the models come on where you see entrance A, half of them would walk on the left, and they alternated. They would come on the left and they would come on the right. And then they would walk their path, so it never deviated. And then the dancers, we could then use the space and have the dancers and choreograph the room all around it. So then the dancers could dance all around the models, and it wouldn't confuse the models, because we told the models, you just stay on this path, you never deviate. There'll be dancers that are dancing all around you, and it would look like it's sort of one whole combined aspect.
I mean, the amazing thing about this show, there's Carol coming out as she started the show. The amazing thing about this show, I mean, yes, you were watching a fashion show, but what you really were witnessing this incredible dance performance that, you know, when you were watching it, you didn't really know. And not only did Mark design all the clothes, he designed all the looks for all the dancers. So every bit of fashion was on every performer in the room. So your eye just didn't you didn't know where to look, because everywhere you looked were just like people walking towards you in different outfits, and that reflected Mark's feelings and Mark's history. And it was, I think, a very
emotional, very emotional. I mean, actually, Mark, when he saw the rehearsal, cried. I mean, he just sat there, and he couldn't even imagine anything this powerful.
There you see some of the dancers. Yeah. No, all of Mark did all of this. So, you know.
Yeah.
It was really an incredible, incredible experience. And, you know, we did 2 shows because we had very few people in the audience because we wanted to keep it very small, the amount of people in the room. We had people staying.
Everybody wanted to stay.
Second performance,
yeah.
the second show, because they feel like they wanted to watch it again because it truly was a performance.
Yeah.
There you see Miley Cyrus.
And this is the models coming out the backside. This is where they would be photographed. So they walked through the audience and they walked, and then they walked back and they would get photographed because, you know, obviously getting the photos and everything is equally as important as a show aspect. And then the models looped around and they went back and formed a straight line for the finale. And then Mark ended up coming through the finale and he stomped his foot and the whole armory went pitch black. So it started with Carol in a spotlight, and when Carol stamped her foot, that's what ignited the whole show. And then it ended with Mark stamping his foot, and it just went. It was perfect timing, and everything went out and went totally black. So it was quite dramatic.
I mean, what's amazing is that when we work on all these shows, and we work with such a great team, you know, Julie, me, and then we have Joe Saint who does the lighting, and Steve Mackey who does the music and sound. So it really is, you know, a great team of creative thinkers to figure out, you know, the staging could not be possible with an amazing lighting, without an amazing lighting designer. So working all that really becomes, you know, sometimes we'll do a show where lighting is the set or choreography is the set. So I feel like, or the soundtrack, we've had shows where we have an incredible orchestra in the room. Those kind of things become devices to show the collection in interesting ways.
Right, and typically I direct the show, and then I usually am in charge of all the choreography. Obviously, this particular show we had Carol as the choreographer, so I was used to understanding how models think and what they're capable of doing, and what they're capable of learning in that time period. And I have to say, one of the key things that is so important for me as a director is to do a full stand-in rehearsal, either the night before or the day of, or whenever we do it, because in doing that and working with stand-ins, and typically we use students from, you know, all over, in doing that, what that teaches me, it teaches me how to talk to them, and it teaches me what they are hearing and what they're absorbing. And so if I can talk to stand-ins within an hour period and get them to understand it, then I can absolutely teach the models how to do it. So it's really vital.
Choreography you're doing, so the pacing with stand-ins is one of the most important things you could do. You couldn't do it without.
No, you have to have that time period. So you have to understand and learn and kind of say, okay, what are they absorbing? What are they not absorbing? You know, that they do understand it, they don't understand it, so that when I do talk to the models and have that really very, very brief period to talk to them, I know that they can get it. So it's vital, and it's a big luxury to be able to do that. So this next show that we did, we chose this one because it was really a site-specific show. This was one of the few instances that we did not have one of the armories. So we had just left the Lexington Avenue Armory had just closed because they were going through a renovation, and the Park Avenue Armory was not available because it had a show into it. So at this point there were very few locations where we could get a lot of people and that were sort of meaningful. So we were in charge of doing the location search, and we did, you know, all over New York, and really Mark is particularly fond of iconic spaces. And one of the spaces, the ZIEGFELD, was actually just closing. So they were, it was at the kind of the tail end of the ZIEGFELD, and they were going to be closing that same year. And we were able to get the location, and it was very meaningful to Mark, as Mark grew up on the Upper West Side and very much remembered the ZIEGFELD and very much remembered going to movies there. So for him, it sort of held an emotional feeling as well. And when he heard that we were able to show up the ZIEGFELD, he got so inspired that he really kind of designed his entire collection around it, and kind of did everything and designed it really as a movie premiere.
We had done a resort show at his store in Soho right before this, and the show started. The audience was inside the store, and we got the models dressed at the Mercer Hotel, and the models walked through the streets of Soho. I mean, not a huge amount of time, but they walked through the streets. So this show, he loved the idea of the energy of the girls walking through the streets. So what was great about this is that, imagine being at a movie premiere. Like, you would be able to witness a movie premiere from outside, which is like all the paparazzi people like coming into the theater. and then obviously in the theater. So in a way, it was like a show within a show. So guests would go into the theater, but then models started outside in the street. And then you can see they were doing a whole red carpet thing out.
And we actually moved the photographers outside too. So the photographers would be like that they're capturing the models on the red carpet as on the premiere, which is typically the opposite, because usually the photographers are photographing them at the end of the show. Here they were photographing them in the beginning. So as the models walked down the thing before they even entered into the ZIEGFELD, they were photographing them. So.
And then after the models walked through the red carpet, they would walk into the theater. And what was so interesting about this is, on the movie screen playing in the theater with the audience sitting was the red carpet. So it was like a red carpet premiere that you were watching, and you also had those same models come into the theater and do the walk in there.
And we had an orchestra that was playing full time. And the interesting part about sending the models is that this was a very complex show to call, because once the models left the tent on the outside, it was one continuous walk. So we had to really figure out the timing of them walking up, getting photographed, going inside, going up an escalator, and keeping them all at a 10-second interval so it would look like it's a continuous show without having these big gaps. So it took a great deal of prior rehearsal to kind of get that timing down.
For the audience, you think of a movie theater or any theater, it's like just a bunch of audience staring at something in front of them. So we needed the experience so you could get close to the models. So we took half the seats out. You can go back. We took half the seats out of the theater, or probably more than half, and built runways. You would never think that this is what we did because it was so seamless. We built runways. As you can see, there were these small little runways because the theater is sloped down. So we built runways, printed carpet to match the existing carpet. But when you were in there, you wouldn't even think that it didn't exist.
It had been touched, yeah.
Yeah, it was really an interesting show. And this is all about the details, like from the carpet that we printed, like I just said, the orchestra playing, the movie premiere playing on the screen. When people went into the space, they went by a concession stand, and we had popcorn.
Yeah, Julia, keep going, because you'll see some of the pictures.
It's like you're in a theater.
Keep going. Yeah. So the striped tent was the model tent on the side. That's where all the models were getting dressed. This is the red carpet of them walking up, and this is where the photographers would do it. These are a playbill that was made, as Steph said, and the carpet. This is the popcorn that everyone got popcorn and T-shirts as they entered the movie theater. That was the marquee with all the people outside at a movie premiere.
What was great about this is you had the audience inside, like participating in the show, but really outside was really a special kind of thing. It was, lots of the public was there, and we had bleachers for people to sit and watch the show as well. So it became like a show for a lot of people to experience.
Mm-hmm. And this is what you're seeing here in the models walking up the red carpet, and they're actually seen on the movie screen. So that shows you kind of the dichotomy of what the audience was seeing inside and what the models were doing on the outside. And then they would walk inside, and then they got to see them up close.
I don't know how they did that walk. How long was the walk, Julie?
It was like
it was one of the longest ones ever.
It was one of the longest ones, yeah. It was a 4-minute walk from beginning to end.
It was really an incredible thing.
Yeah.
So
and then the last one
we wanted to talk about was a show we like to call, or most people like to call, The Pink House. It's been like a favorite of a lot of people, and we thought it was an interesting show to talk about because it is truly like a built set environment. And what was interesting about this show is that, like I said, when we sat down with MARC, he starts to talk about what the collection is. And this season, that particular season, it was about the clothes were utilitarian, and they were a certain silhouette, but in taking those kind of military inspired clothes, but doing them in a luxe way, not with a lot of color. If there were colors, and there are colors, they were like olive and deeper
khaki and
colors, but done in a luxe way. So MARC thought it would be interesting to because the Armory is known as an arts thing, to just create some kind of sculpture. to create something that felt like it just kind of existed in the space when guests would walk in. So we built this incredibly large pink house. And it was larger than real life. It was, 100 feet long. And everything was blown up in proportion. And the great thing about this show is that it was a device to show the clothes against color. So MARC loved the idea of showing the clothes against kind of the color of Pepto-Bismol. So we created this whole environment. There was, the guests sat on pink dyed carpet. There was a gravel around the house. There was this giant kind of sculpture that just fell into the middle of the armory and just kind of, you walked in and it was like, it took over the entire space. And so the show was a really interesting experience. Also, we teamed with Beats headphones. You can see some of the build there. You can see the scale and how large it was. So for this particular show, every audience member sat on the bleachers and got their own set of Beats headphones. And what was great about that is that instead of experiencing the sound and the show collectively, it was very introspective. The sound, you put on the headphones and you had the soundtrack on there. It was a spoken word. So it felt very like heady, I guess, in a really interesting way. Like you were experiencing it like by yourself, but collectively in a room. You can see some of the photos. And what was great is that the color was the device that kind of was great for the backdrop of these golds and olive greens. And you can see some of the photos there.
Yeah. Great, so that kind of is the 3 shows, and we've used it.
I think what's good about all those shows is that it shows 3 different ways to do a show in a way, but they're all equally important, I think. And I think, again, that's why MARC is such an incredible designer, showman, director, because we're trying things we've never tried before. And we're really kind of pushing the envelope in so many different ways.
Great. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And we've got actually a couple of additional guests here, students. One SCAD alum, Abby Wiggum, who graduated in fashion marketing in 2020, and Sam John, who is a junior in the performing arts program at SCAD. And they would like to lob some questions at you guys.
Okay.
Great.
So my question, based on all of the stuff we just looked at, was I was really intrigued by how y'all constantly subverted expectations of audience members, and also in particular in the fashion show where you had the lack of noise and the lack of sight. When you subvert the senses of the audience like that, how do you get back to the state of normalcy without shocking them too far? Because when that's removed, when that certain sense is removed, you get this feeling of there's just vacuum. But when it's pushed back, there has to be done with some, I just want to know, how do you approach that with the delicacy of kind of...
I mean, I think there's an expectation at fashion shows, and the expectation, the normal thing would be, sit down, the lights dim, the music comes up, the models walk, and you experience that. And I think what's interesting about these things, that you're kind of scaring the audience in a way. Like you're making them kind of think about things differently. I mean, we're not trying to scare them, but what you're trying to, you want them to notice the clothes, and that's the most important thing. So I think some of this thing, like stripping it away, puts the attention on the clothes first and foremost, but also maybe making the audience a little uncomfortable, which I think is good creatively to push them in that direction.
Right.
Julie, what do you think? I mean,
Yeah, I think absolutely that it's it does give them an altered perception, and I think that's a really interesting thing. It makes them think in a different way, and I think that's, if you're able to do that, I think that's a big success. And not that it always works, but in this particular case, it was really something that it was unique, and it did really make them think. And similarly to the experience that they had with the Carol Armitage, because to walk in and your senses were just absolutely bombarded, because to come in and see this fully fleshed, I mean, this is something that, you know, could have been in any dance performance, in any theater, you know, that happened. And I'm telling you, this was done in less than 5 days. And it was an amazing, you know, and it just incredible talent and of the various people. And Carol and her dancers, it just blew me away at how quickly they could learn and how quickly they could adapt, and how their energy played off the models, and how the models who had never seen this, they walked into a space and they have these dancers dancing all around them. They have no idea where they're going. And these people are doing all the stuff around them where they're hitting the floor and they're pushing them. And I said, just walk past them and push them down. And they're like, what? You know, and, you know, to experience this at firsthand, and then to have it all kind of meld and work together, it's a truly unique experience. So.
Thank you.
So you guys, you know, you talked a lot about pushing the boundaries and thinking outside of the box. So kind of in this world of COVID and post-COVID, with all the distancing and stuff, what kind of changes do you see happening with the shows?
Well, I think for the time being, people are trying to figure that out still. It's still like ongoing, and you can see what's happened in Europe for couture and men's, whether it's a film or something that is very obviously socially distant. But I think it's an exciting time. I've said this. I mean, it's a scary thing not knowing, and it's, you know, a horrible thing, but creatively, I think it's an interesting time to still try to show fashion in a way. I don't think the runway show is going away. I think for the time being, we have to think of it differently. Julie and I have talked about this. And then, you know, a fashion film doesn't replace that energy you feel in a room with models, other people, you know, and I do think even without having an audience in the room, be able to show a live stream of a show is more interesting, I mean, as to watch fashion than a film that you kind of, it's a great brand piece, but you might not understand the clothes. And that's why we're there. We're there to celebrate the clothes and the artistry and craft, and also to show it as a business.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for both of you. I find it so interesting in your backgrounds that you came into the fashion world kind of obliquely, but you came with credentials. You know, Julie, you were studying fine art and business, and Stefan, you just had so many creative pistons firing. So I would really like to know, what would you tell your younger self about your burgeoning career that you know now to be a success that you didn't know then?
I mean, I'll say one of the things that I always say to, whether it's, you know, my employees or different people that I talk to, is that, you know, when I first came, as you said, I knew I loved fashion. I was passionate about it. And I always say to people, you know, like, think about what you love, think about what you love to do, think about what you love to do, and, you know, and follow that. And, you know, if it comes to design or something, what designers do you like? What is it? Is it the photography? Is it the models? Is it the, you know, there's so many different aspects to it. And I always say to everybody, you know what, creativity and things can come in so many different forms that, you know, there's no one right path. And I think, you know, my biggest thing, I've always been very driven, and I've been very, I've always, you know, really had a lot of grit and a lot of determination, and I never gave up. I'm very, very determined. And I always say to people, you know, it never, and one of the things I love about fashion is there's so many different ways to enter it, because there are those that are so talented, there are those that can sew, there are those that can design, there are those who can, you know, there's so many different creative outlets about it. But, and there are those that have loved fashion, and they followed it since they were little kids, and they, you know, they've read every magazine, they followed every model, they know every designer. And then there are those that come in from a different way. There's no right or wrong way to enter it. It's just, you know, what area interests you, you know, look at that, follow it, you know, and network. I mean, I would tell everybody, just every single person you meet, ask them, what do they do? What is their daily, you know, job consist of? What do they love? What are some of the things? And just because there's so many different things that you can do, but it's really having the determination, it's having the follow through. And as I said, you know, it's not rocket science, you know, like, you know, but it is, you have to love it. You have to absolutely pursue it. You have to stick with it. You have to be able to listen well. You know, if you could listen well and you can hear what the designer's really saying, what they want, you know. I often say, you know, it's one of my strongest assets is that I can go into a room and I can listen and I can tell, like, if everybody's in a good place or a bad place. And sometimes I'll walk in, so I'll be doing 10 shows simultaneously, and I'll go from one show to the next, and I'll go to my team. I'll say, okay, how's everything doing? And they're like, oh, it's great, it's great. And I look at them, I go, what do you mean it's great? Not one person in this room is looking at each other. Not one person is, you know, they're all looking down. Nobody's looking at each other. There's not, something's not right. They're not on track. So what is this that's going to take it to get it back on track? So, you know, it's the small things, and there's not any one big thing. And you don't have to be, you know, the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be, you know, the things. It's just, do you, you know, love what you do? You pay attention. You absolutely, you know, you are part of a team. You engage, and, you know, I think that's, and you always, you know, participate, and, you know, you ask the questions, you stay, you just, you know, you are interested, and you contribute, you know. And I remember the first time that I ever did this, I remember calling my mother going, oh my God, they asked my opinion. Can you believe that? You know, and I was so excited that somebody actually asked my opinion. And I gave it, of course, but, you know.
Yeah, you know, what you just said is terrific advice for any student graduating, looking at jobs, going to interviews or internship.
Yeah.
Engage, be excited, be passionate, love what you do.
And just have positive energy. I can't tell you how simple it is that if you go in the room, you have positive energy, you have a positive outlook, you know, you're contributing, and you're in this way, like, what that brings to a room and what that brings to a situation is incalculable. You know, it's more so than talent, because you can be somebody who's extremely talented, but they either give up, or they're moody, or they're, you know, they don't see it through, and they don't do it. But if you have, you know, stick with the long road, and if you can, you know, go in, day in, day out, you're consistent, you know. And if I do something wrong, frankly, I get excited because I learn from it, you know, and I learn many more things from my mistakes than I do from my successes. And the first time I do something not right, you know, I'm the first one to sort of go, oh God, and I want to go back and I want to figure it out, and I want to figure out how do I do it better, and how do I do it right. And it's you know, it's really, really important. And it is just those small things. And, you know, again, it doesn't take rocket science for you. It's just, you know, if you do something, and if you find something that you love, then you're interested, and you just keep going back, and you're curious, and you just keep going in, and you ask somebody, how did you do that? Why did you do that? What made you think about that? I never would have seen that, or, you know, and then you go back and you learn how to, like, develop and how to read a trend, or how to do something. So, you know, it is the small things, but it's just that you just keep that thread, and you just keep, you know, you keep persisting through.
Fantastic. Sam and Abby, you guys have any other questions?
When you're working and you're kind of pulling your references and your sources of inspiration, where do you often go to find those?
So usually when I work with any designer, what I want to do is I want to sit down with them, have a conversation, see where their head's at, you know, what they're feeling. And that could be, you know, sometimes Mark doesn't know. He's like, I'm not sure yet. I'm getting there. Be patient, it's going to happen. And then eventually we'll start talking. And what I like to do is have some kind of visual dialogue as a starting point before we start designing anything. So we start looking at, you know, over the years, we look at film references, we look at dance references. It could be an old movie, it could be a dance performance, it could be something we both had seen in a theater or somewhere else, or it could be an art installation, or it could be, I mean, so many different type of places. I think, you know, your references, I have an amazing library that I like to go back to time and time again. But I think just, you can pull from anywhere. So you start this visual language together. and just kind of talk about things. And, you know, we'll look at like a William Eggleston photograph, for example, and it'll be like purple light in the background. And emotionally, Mark will that will resonate with him. And he'll say like, I don't know why I like that, but I love this feeling of this photograph. So that's something as we build it and as we build the show, you know, we can, not necessarily we're doing the purple light, but, you know, it starts a conversation when we're doing design and we're talking about lighting and choreography, staging. It is so many different types of things, music, sound. I mean, all those visual references are great. They're great starting points. You know, because I think people can they can be inspired, but they can also understand that language and build upon that.
And I think, Steph, was interesting what you said. One of the biggest things I learned from Mark, and it's a really important lesson too in your listening, is often it's equally important to listen to what they don't like as to what they do like. Because Mark happens to be one of these designers that he'll talk about something and you say, well, Mark, what are you feeling? What do you want? I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. I like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. I like that. So in listening to what he doesn't like, you're determining what he does want. So I think it's equally as important in your listening is to, you know, to understand. And really part of that edit process is just that you're editing. So you're kind of distilling out each time, you know, the various things that they do like and the things that they don't like. And that ultimately brings you to a very important, you know, point.
So when you build your visual vocabulary as a creative person, and we're all kind of in the same age group, same era, same points of references, what advice would you give to students in terms of literature, dance, movies, art? Like, what should they be taking it all in?
Yes,
I mean, what do you,
100%.
yes.
Yeah, popular culture is so important.
Know as much as you can. And you know what? You can't know everything. And for me, I feel like there's so much I want to learn, you know, learning about new artists or maybe things that I didn't know before that they've been dead for 300 years. So I think the more you can know, I mean, popular culture, extremely important, but knowing about literature, I mean, it depends on the designer. You know, when I worked with Karl Lagerfeld, what was interesting is that he's extremely, you know, extremely well-read. So literature became more kind of a touchstone when you were talking to him, literature and art. And for other designers, it could be fashion history, it could be dance, it could be
architecture, it could be
architecture. I mean, it depends. I mean, and designers they have different passions and different,
right.
You know, they love more or less. But I think to know all about those things and all those periods and things, the research for me on any show, any project is so much of the love of the project, because I feel like I'm learning as I'm designing before I do anything.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we have time for maybe one quick question. Sam, Abby, do you have one? Sam, you have one?
So throughout the collections that we saw, I felt that you constantly kept implementing like latest technological advancements, especially with the viscous water that, you know, you could walk on. And also towards the end where you implemented the Beats headphones, kind of like silent show.
Right.
I want to know, how do you find a healthy balance between using those technological advancements, but also staying true to the narrative you're trying to tell? Because sometimes those work as like conflicting elements. How do you keep that balance healthy and productive?
You know, I think that it's a matter of obviously when you're working with designers, really following really their lead as well, and kind of what those things are. I think you do, as Steph said, you do try to experiment, and you do try to see what is something that is going to be whether it's the latest or whether it's you want it to complement, and you know, it's important. I think that the clothes really become the main feature, and I think we've all done shows before where it has been overdone. You know, there have been things where it's been too confusing and too whatever, but I think that it is important to find that balance, but it is important to experiment and to have that, you know, that sort of tactile feeling to it. And, you know, I think you kind of know as you're working on the collection, what is, you know, and it's also a point in time. You know, I think there are different points in time, and a lot of the shows that you've seen are over a 30-year span. So at different points in time, different things are more important. You know, sometimes it's about sound, sometimes it's about lighting, sometimes it is about the set. So, you know, sometimes just the period of time dictates, you know, what feels more right and what feels, you know, more wrong. So, you know, that is an important thing. And I think that, you know, you'll find that today too, you know, because I do think this is, as Steph said, talking about, you know, this period, this is an enormous period of change. And like, we're dealing with every one of our designers right now as we're going into the season, coming off of just something that is, you know, really rocked their worlds. And it's a very reflective time. And I think people are, what I'm, you know, feeling and hearing this upcoming season is people really are going back to their roots. They're going back to sort of what feels, you know, what feels like it's their integrity, what feels like it's really honest to them, what feels like it's their core, because I think that their world has been so rocked that that's an important thing for them to go back to. And I think it's also, given the time, given the mood that everyone's in, it feels like it's the right thing. So I think that's kind of what people really are experimenting with this season.
I think I totally agree with you, Julie. And I think I hate the idea of just doing a set for doing a set. I think it's got to be right. And sometimes the simpler approach or something that has more integrity. I mean, first and foremost, you want it to be right for the brand and for the collection. And that's really why you're there. So I think it's got to make sense for what you're doing. So sometimes for me, a quieter show or something that's simpler makes more sense for a designer.
Wow, you guys, what a wonderful, hour. I think we could do another hour. The creative information and flow from you two is fantastic. Thank you, Stefan and Julie, for joining us today. We're gonna
You're welcome.
Bye, and want to thank Sam and Abby. You guys were great. Thank you so much for being on Guest Gusto at
Thank
SCAD.
you, and best of luck to all of you.
Yes.
Thank you.
What you create.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.